At my wife's celebration of life, my nephew handed me a legal envelope and whispered, "You have 10 days to get out of the cottage. It's mine now." I stood there in my best suit, still numb from Linda's funeral that morning, and watched Marcus walk away with that smirk I'd seen too many times before. 10 days. The cottage my grandparents built with their own hands in 1952. The place where Linda and I had spent every summer for 43 years. The dock where I taught our daughter Emma to fish. The screened porch where Linda had her morning coffee right up until the cancer made it impossible to leave the hospital. 10 days to pack up 70 years of memories because my nephew said so. I didn't open the envelope right away. I couldn't. The room was still full of people sharing stories about Linda, about her 28 years teaching grade 3, about her volunteer work at the hospital, about her laugh that could fill a room. My daughter Emma was across the hall accepting condolences, her eyes red from crying. This wasn't the time. So I slipped the envelope into my jacket pocket and went back to thanking people for coming, shaking hands, accepting casseroles I knew I'd never eat. It wasn't until later that night, sitting alone in our house in Toronto, that I finally looked at the papers. Eviction notice, legal claim to the property, a will I'd never seen before, supposedly signed by my grandmother in 2008, leaving the Lake Muskoka cottage to Marcus upon her death. The problem was, my grandmother had died in 2006, and she'd been in a nursing home with advanced dementia since 2003. I read the document 3 times, each time feeling something cold settle in my chest. Not anger yet, something quieter, something that told me to stop, to think, to plan. My grandmother had left that cottage to me in her actual will. I'd been there when her lawyer read it in his office on Yonge Street. I remembered every word. The cottage, the boat, the small savings account. All to me because I was the one who'd visited her every week, who'd held her hand when she didn't know who I was anymore, who'd made sure she had fresh flowers in her room at Sunrise Manor. Marcus had visited her exactly twice in those final 3 years. Once to ask for money, once to ask for more money. I called Emma first thing the next morning. She was still at her place in Ottawa, trying to make sense of losing her mother while managing her job as a Crown prosecutor. When I told her about the papers, there was a long silence on the line. "Dad," she finally said, her voice tight with that particular anger that came from her mother's side of the family. "Tell me you're not just going to accept this." "I'm not." "Good, because I know a lawyer in Toronto who specializes in estate fraud. Her name is Patricia Chen. She's brilliant, and she hates people who take advantage of grieving families." I wrote down the number. That afternoon, I was sitting in Patricia Chen's office on King Street, a modern space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. She was younger than I expected, maybe 45, with sharp eyes that didn't miss anything as she reviewed the papers Marcus had given me. "This is fake," she said after 10 minutes. "I mean, it's a good fake, professional, but it's fake." "How can you tell?" "Your grandmother's signature." She pulled out a magnifying glass, something I hadn't seen anyone use outside of old detective movies. "See these hesitation marks? People with dementia don't write like this. They either can't write at all, or they write with muscle memory, smooth and automatic. This looks like someone copied a signature very carefully, trying to get it perfect. That's not how real signatures work." She made some notes on her laptop. "We'll need the original will. Do you have it?" "It's in my safety deposit box at TD Bank." "Good. We'll also need medical records proving your grandmother's mental state in 2008. And I want to know who witnessed this supposed will, who notarized it, and whether those people actually exist." The next day, I drove up to the cottage. It was early November, the trees along Highway 11, already bare, the lake gray and choppy under a cold sky. I had a key, of course. I'd had a key since I was 16 years old, but when I pulled up the long gravel driveway, I saw that Marcus had already changed the locks. New deadbolts, commercial grade. A sign on the door that read, "Private property, no trespassing." I stood on the porch my grandfather had built, looking through the window at the living room where Linda and I had celebrated 43 anniversaries, and I felt something crack open inside me. Not grief this time, something harder. I pulled out my phone and took pictures. The new locks, The sign. The truck parked around back with Marcus's company logo on the side. Sterling Development. Building tomorrow's Muskoka. Then I drove into Bracebridge and got a room at the Comfort Inn. That evening, I sat in a Tim Hortons with my laptop and started digging. Marcus's company had a website. All sleek photos of luxury condos and testimonials from happy buyers. I clicked through the portfolio. 12 properties in the past 5 years, all around Lake Muskoka, all in places where old cottages used to be. I opened Google Maps and traced the pattern. Every single property had been a family cottage. Every single one had been demolished and replaced with a 3-story glass and cedar monstrosity selling for $2 or $3 million. Sterling Development, specialized in acquiring heritage properties in prime locations. Translation. Marcus found old family cottages, got them somehow, tore them down, and built McMansions for Toronto lawyers and hockey players. The cottage my grandparents built was worth maybe $300,000 as it stood. The land it sat on, with 200 feet of pristine Lake Muskoka waterfront, was worth at least $1.2 million, maybe more if you had the right permits. I called Patricia the next morning. "I need you to pull every property transfer Marcus has been involved with," I said. "Every cottage he's acquired in the past 10 years. I want to know how he got them." "That'll take time." "I have time. I'm not going anywhere." While Patricia worked on the legal side, I started my own investigation. I drove around Lake Muskoka, looking for Marcus's other projects. Found them easily enough. Talked to neighbors. Asked questions. Most people didn't want to talk at first. But when I explained I was trying to save my family cottage, doors opened. At the third property, I met an older woman named Dorothy, who lived next door to what used to be the Morrison cottage. She invited me in for tea, pointed at the massive modern house next door with barely concealed disgust. "That used to be where the Morrison family gathered every summer," she said. 5 generations. Then old Jim Morrison got sick, and somehow his grandson ended up with the property. Tore it down before Jim was even cold in the ground. The grandson? Young man, real charmer until you got to know him, came around when Jim was in palliative care, got him to sign some papers. Jim's daughter tried to fight it, but by the time the lawyers got involved, the cottage was already rubble. My hands tightened around my teacup. This grandson, did he have a company? Sterling something. Development company. I drove back to Toronto with 7 similar stories. 7 families who'd lost their cottages to Marcus. 7 forged documents. Confused elderly people. Grieving families who didn't have the energy to fight. Patricia called me that night. "I've got something. 3 of Marcus's property acquisitions are currently under investigation by the OPP for potential fraud. And get this, your nephew has gambling debts. Serious ones. He owes $230,000 to a casino in Niagara Falls. How'd you find that out?" "I have a friend who's a forensic accountant. She found a lien against Marcus's personal assets, filed by the casino's legal team. He's desperate for cash." The pieces were coming together. Marcus needed money fast. The cottage property was worth over $1 million. He forged a will, waited until Linda died, and I was too grief-stricken to think straight, then tried to push me out before I could mount a defense. But he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated how much I loved that cottage, how much it meant, and he definitely underestimated Emma. My daughter flew down from Ottawa the following weekend. We sat at my kitchen table with Patricia and a private investigator Patricia had hired, a former RCMP officer named David Kowalski. "I've been watching Marcus," David said, sliding photos across the table. "He's meeting with investors, showing them property surveys of your cottage lot. He's already got architectural plans for a 4-unit luxury development. Construction's supposed to start in January." Emma picked up one of the photos. "He's selling shares in a property he doesn't own? Looks like it. That's fraud on top of the will forgery." Patricia made a note. "I've got the medical records from Sunrise Manor. Your grandmother was documented as having severe dementia in 2008. She couldn't recognize family members, couldn't sign her own name. There's no way she signed that will." "So what do we do?" I asked. "We file a complaint with the OPP. We take this to a judge. And we make sure Marcus goes down for what he's done. Not just to you, but to all those other families. The next morning, Emma and I drove to the OPP detachment in Aurelia. Detective Sarah Marshall listened to our story for 90 minutes, taking notes, asking questions, making phone calls. By the time we left, she had opened an official investigation into Marcus Sterling and Sterling Development. But we didn't stop there. Patricia filed an emergency motion to freeze any transactions related to the cottage property. The judge granted it within 48 hours. Marcus couldn't sell, couldn't develop, couldn't do anything until the will dispute was resolved. I found out later that Marcus was in a meeting with his investors when the court order arrived. He'd been showing them architectural renderings of the luxury condos he was planning to build, taking deposits, promising construction would start after the holidays. When the sheriff showed up and served him with papers freezing the property, his investors demanded their money back immediately. Marcus called me that night. First time I'd heard his voice since the celebration of life. "Uncle Robert," he said, and I could hear the desperation underneath the fake friendliness. "I think there's been a misunderstanding about the cottage. Maybe we can work something out. You forged documents. You lied about my grandmother's will. You tried to steal property that's been in our family for 70 years. That's not what happened. I found paperwork that showed. You found paperwork you created. And I found 7 other families you did this to. The OPP found them too." Silence on the line. "You should hire a lawyer, Marcus. A good one. You're going to need it." I hung up. The investigation moved faster than I expected. Detective Marshall was thorough. She pulled financial records, interviewed witnesses, tracked down the notary who'd supposedly witnessed my grandmother's will. Turned out the notary had died in 2010, which made it pretty hard for him to have witnessed a 2008 document. The signature on the fake will was forged too. Marcus's lawyer tried to negotiate, offered to drop his claim to the cottage if we dropped the fraud investigation. Patricia's response was elegant and brutal. "Your client committed multiple felonies. Tell him to prepare for criminal charges." 3 weeks later, Marcus was arrested. Wire fraud, forgery, theft, over 5,000, fraud affecting title to property. The OPP charged him with 14 counts related to the cottage alone, with more charges pending for the other properties. I was having coffee in my kitchen when Detective Marshall called to tell me. I thanked her, hung up, and sat there for a long time, looking at the photo on my fridge. Linda and me at the cottage last summer, sitting on the dock, her wearing that ridiculous sun hat she loved, both of us smiling. The trial took 8 months. I sat in the courtroom every single day, watching Marcus try to explain why he'd done it, watching his lawyer try to spin it as a misunderstanding, a mistake, a family dispute that had gotten out of hand. Emma was the one who demolished that defense. She'd taken a leave from her job to help the Crown prosecutor. She walked the jury through the forged documents, the fake signatures, the pattern of targeting elderly people in declining health. She showed them the medical records, proving my grandmother couldn't have signed anything in 2008. She brought in experts who testified about signature forgery, about dementia, about how predators target grieving families. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Marcus got 6 years in federal prison. His company was dissolved, his assets seized to repay the families he'd defrauded. The cottage came back to me officially, legally, permanently. But here's the thing. When I drove up to Lake Muskoka that first weekend after the trial, when I unlocked the door with my original key that still worked in the old lock I'd had reinstalled, when I walked through the rooms where Linda and I had built our life together, I realized something. I couldn't just keep it for myself. Not after everything that had happened. I called Emma. I want to turn it into something Linda would have loved. Like what? A retreat. For families dealing with cancer. A place where they can come, be together, away from hospitals and treatments, and fear, free of charge. In Linda's memory, I could hear my daughter crying on the other end of the line. Mom would love that. It took a year to set up. I worked with the Muskoka Hospital Foundation, established a nonprofit, hired a small staff. The Linda Margaret Thompson Cottage became a place where families could come for a week, sometimes 2, while their loved one was in treatment. A place to fish, to sit on the porch, to make memories while there was still time. The first family arrived in June. A father with stage 4 lymphoma, his wife, their 3 kids. I showed them around, taught the kids how to fish off the dock, just like I'd taught Emma. Watched them discover the old board games in the closet, the kayaks in the boathouse, the hammock where Linda used to read. On their last day, the mother found me on the porch. "Thank you," she said. "You gave us something we thought we'd lost." "What's that?" "Hope. Normal. Time together without being scared." I think about Marcus sometimes, about how he saw the cottage as nothing but a piece of valuable land, something to tear down and replace with something more profitable. He never understood that some things matter more than money. Some things you protect because of what they mean, who they connect you to, what they represent. My grandmother built that place with love. My parents maintained it with care. Linda and I filled it with 43 years of memories. And now other families get to make their own memories there, get to find a little peace in the middle of their hardest days. That's Linda's real legacy. Not the cottage itself, but what it gives to people who need it. Emma visits every few weeks, helps with the program, organizes fundraisers. Last month, we had a gala in Toronto that raised enough money to cover operations for another year. One of the speakers was Dorothy Morrison, whose family cottage Marcus had torn down. She told the story of how we'd met, how my fight to save my cottage had inspired her to sue Marcus's estate for restitution. She got enough money to buy a small cottage 3 doors down from mine. Her grandchildren fish off her dock now, just like they used to. 7 families recovered their losses. Marcus's investors got their money back. The legal fees were steep, but Patricia Chen was worth every penny. She still calls sometimes, sends referrals to families fighting similar battles. As I sit here on the porch, watching the sun set over Lake Muskoka, I can almost hear Linda's voice. She'd be proud, I think. Not of the revenge, not of Marcus going to prison, but of what came after. Of turning something ugly into something beautiful. Of helping families find a little peace. That's what justice really looks like. Not just punishing the people who do wrong, but building something better from the wreckage they leave behind. The cottage my grandparents built in 1952 is still standing. The dock where I taught Emma to fish is getting a new coat of stain this weekend. The screened porch where Linda had her morning coffee now hosts families who desperately need a place to breathe. Marcus wanted to tear it all down for profit. Instead, it's become exactly what Linda would have wanted it to be. A place of hope, of healing, of love. And every time a new family arrives, every time I see kids running down to the lake or parents relaxing on the porch for the first time in months, I know we did the right thing. We fought for what mattered. We won. And we turned that victory into something that will help people for generations to come. That's the real story. Not about what Marcus tried to take, but about what we chose to give.